Well, hello everyone. Back again for another Monday of Fair Life. That's right. It is Monday night at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, and it is, well, as always, a fun time in the fair world. And hello. Thanks for tuning in, Jan. Nice to see you. Uh, yeah. it is it's an interesting transition time is how I would put it, because when you start getting into June, all of the spring fairs they tend to end around Memorial Day and around that time. So you start getting into June, a lot of the big fairs that you're familiar with suddenly they're done. So you end up with sometimes some smaller fairs, a couple of larger ones in the summer, but it's an interesting time period. So yeah, something to check out. So some cool stuff. Yeah, I think that it has been an interesting week. I've been working on several different projects and also working on some booking, believe it or not, for myself. So really digging in deep and doing way too much research. I know it sounds strange for me, right? Never happens, but this time I did it. So yeah, how is everybody else doing? Are there any fairs that I know Jan is probably already plotting what fairs she's going to be going to pretty soon. I imagine it'll be pretty quick when she jumps into that. But yeah, it's been an interesting time. So yeah, it's like I said, a weird transition time. I think there's only this weekend. There's only like about seven fairs that are going to be open. Seven main fairs. So yeah, something definitely different. Now, for me, oh yeah, Kajan's just throwing in Kentucky and Bristol. That makes sense. And I really am looking forward to hear what Jan says about Kentucky, because I have not been there, so I'm kind of interesting. And hello, Kathy and Donna. Hey, great to see you. But yeah, it is going to be an interesting time. Of course, Kentucky and Bristol are coming up later in the season. Early June, mid June is kind of a strange time. We'll be jumping into Colorado Fair here, and that's always sort of one of the big summer fairs. That them and Bristol are two of the big ones that come up. And then when you get into August, you start getting into some fairs that start opening up, but towards Labor Day. Summer is a really odd time for fair. I don't know. I mean, usually it's tough for people who are performing on the road. Summer can be an odd time for fairs, and of course, winter can be an odd time. Those are sort of, I don't want to say the off seasons. They used to be more so. Now it's not as much, because summer, there are a lot more fairs in the summer than there used to be. I mean, I don't know, for you watching, correct me if I'm wrong, but for me, around 20 years ago, summer didn't really have many fairs. A few small ones would crop up, but that was it. It didn't really have a lot. People considered it, I guess, too hot, and they didn't try it. It was always spring or fall. But no, we've done an interesting thing, jumping on with a lot more fairs this summer than I have noticed in the past. So that's always a good thing. And it also is a good sign for a getting towards the end of COVID type of thing, when you see a lot of fairs that are coming up. So that's always a good feeling. So yeah, I guess let me go ahead and, since we're starting into this, let's jump in and talk about what fairs are coming up. That is always nice. Let's see. Let's go with that. Here we go. Yeah, here's a nice map of what fairs are coming up. And hey, Greg. Um, Actually, let's make this bigger. I did that last time, so let's go full screen on this. So it's a little easier to see. I'll just do the voiceover. I'll be the haunting voice in the background. So just I'm warning you so it doesn't freak anybody out. Okay, it's important. So here we go. A nice nice map. Missouri representing again. Yes, that's true, Alicia. Excellent. Yeah. So what we have is fewer than last week. A few fairs closed, like I said, um, like the Oklahoma Renaissance Festival. Um, so yeah, a few changes in New Jersey. So definitely some changes. Um, but here we go. I guess starting in Texas, I mean, Scarborough Fair ended, but we have the Texas Viking Festival in Page, Texas. So that's a newer fair, something interesting to check out for the Viking fair community. Loving that. Then, like Alicia just said, White Hart Renaissance Fair in Hartville, 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 Missouri. So yes, jumping up there, and then you go over to the Kentucky Highland Renaissance Festival in Minutes, Kentucky, and then right over to the West Virginia Renaissance Festival in Lewisburg, West Virginia, and then you jump up to Connecticut, which always a fun place. Um, yeah, the Robin Hood's Fair in Harwinton, Connecticut. Oh, and hey, Janet, nice to see you too. Let's see. Then you go down to the Georgia Renaissance Festival that is still going on, and down to the Cocoa Beach Pirate Fest. And this is going to be the final one because the International Palms Resort, where it's held, is being torn down later this year. So that's in Cocoa Beach, Florida. And Tamara says her internet is working, so that is always a plus. Yes, good to have the internet working. That's always one of the big problems with going to some of these fairs, because fairs are normally not in the middle of a major city. They're on the outskirts or sometimes way out in the country. And it makes a lot of sense because you want to get back to nature and be away from the city for fairs. So should be interesting. With internet and phone access, that is something to always be conscious of. You want to know what services are available if you're going out there. Definitely. So yes, that is what we have. Just 7 fairs, so something to check out. Definitely a smaller percentage of the country. You don't see the West represented quite as much in the summer, but we'll see as the summer goes on what we can find. So always interesting. Yes, yes. A nice mix of. It's just nice to see that many fairs still going on in the summer because I'm so used to seeing not many, like I said earlier. And Jan is right. The last weekend for Georgia, and that, yeah, like I said, a lot of fairs that are in the spring, the beginning of June is kind of when they end, and Georgia's carrying on. It's always been interesting because as fairs come on, they start out with usually 2 weekends or so, sometimes 3 for the first year, and then they gradually build and go to 4 and go to 5 and 6 weekends, and then 7 and 8, and they start really pushing out a bit. It's kind of interesting. Definitely an interesting process. So something to look at. Always fun. Yeah. So for you watching, what is the best fair, and what is the strangest fair y'all have ever been to or seen or even heard of? I'd be curious to see what. I mean, Jan especially, because I'm sure she's been to some really. She's certainly done the national tour of fairs more than most people. But yeah, what would you say is? I don't know, coolest fair might be the wrong way to put it. Just one of the most interesting fairs. Let's put it that way. Just a very interesting fair and a very odd fair. If you can put both of those in, I'd be really curious to hear what your responses are. Because yeah, that is interesting. For me, ooh, that's a tough one. And I hadn't prepared this. This is off the top of my head. Let's see. I think for me, the most interesting fair. Wow. That's really tough. Because I've been to so many, and it's really a challenge to kind of narrow it down because they're all different. They're all different in their own way, and some are more. Oh, and Donna's saying most unusual one was Excalibur. I was thinking of that. Of course, that one, Excalibur Fantasy Fair, doesn't exist anymore, but definitely a good one. And your favorite is Scarby. Well, that makes sense. I've talked to a lot of people whose favorite is Scarby, and Scarby's definitely a good fair. Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the most odd ones for me is sort of the Castle of Muskogee, I have to say. It's kind of an interesting, odd fair because it's in northeast Oklahoma, and they have sort of a small little convention center hall kind of thing that is designed to, the outside is made to look like a castle. And they have a lot of local events there throughout the year. But yeah, it's just an interesting approach where they have their own little area convention center where I mean, I'm sure, I think I've heard before they've held things as varied as parties to the prom. I mean, local prom. It's been kind of interesting. So you have that, but you also have a fair that goes around once a year. So definitely interesting. It's an interesting choice. I've never seen another fair quite like that now. And Donnie, yes, the West Texas Renaissance Festival out in Abilene, Texas. That was an interesting fair that lasted couple, 3-4 years. I don't remember how long that one lasted. It was a few years, but definitely a nice fair. A nice fair. Definitely a lot of fun. And that's always one of the joys, because you go to some of the smaller fairs when you're used to going to some of the big ones, and it's in the same area, and you see a few of the groups that you've seen at other fairs, and you get to, it's a little more intimate, and it's not quite as overwhelming. It's, how do I put this? At larger fairs, it's really hard to just hang out and talk with people as much. I mean, you can say hi and all of that, but yeah, I mean, having some serious conversations and being able to really get to know people, not as easy. In the smaller fairs, a lot easier to do that. So I consider them very valuable. 4 years, Donna, okay. I was curious. I thought it was about that. That makes sense. Yes. And anyone else? Jan says Sherwood is best. Found Arizona had a different flavor than the others. Now Arizona, I will totally give you, that's different. I mean, it's one of those things where it's so dry there. They have little like oasis sections when you it's kind of shaped like a donut, and then you have a little offshoot that goes off to the joust. But it's a really large donut. It's not small fair. It's not a small fair, but you go in and you kind of work your way around, and it's just they have this little oasis of grass and a few trees, and all of the buskers, the musicians and performers, they all hawk to those and just plant themselves there, so they get a little shade and a little grass, and they get to play and play music and perform and have their hat out for tips, and people flock to there too. It's an interesting thing. I mean, I understand why they do it, and it does add a lot to the fair. So definitely different. Oh wow, Kathy, an older one in Ohio. Okay. Wow. Oh, nice. Yeah, there are a lot of really cool fairs out there. Yeah, I mean, I love Sherwood, of course, mainly because of the trees. It's a really nice fair with, yeah, I mean, it just has a good attitude. It's one of the only fairs I've ever been to that has no choke points, and at least very few. What I mean by choke points is they have paths and roads there, kind of thing, that lanes that people can walk by, but you don't have to. Lots of room in the forest to just kind of walk around among the trees and get wherever you want. I mean, there's an infinite number of ways to get from point A to point B. It's great. It's a great feeling, because it's a feeling of freedom you don't normally feel at a fair. Normally you go down a lane and you follow it around. Not here. You have a lot of choices and options, and it gives you that feeling of being in a forest more than most every other fair I've been to. And they did a great job with that. It reminds me a lot of Hawkwood, which is an old one from Northeast Texas that some people might remember in that regard, where a lot of trees and the ability to just kind of walk around and wander through. Yeah. And Damaris says the Sherwood trees are my favorite cast member. Not only that, they're like a steady, consistent umbrella. So if the sun's out or whatever, it's easy to find shade, very easy. You don't have to. At some fairs, you have to find okay, is there a shady spot? Maybe somewhere way over there. Not at Sherwood. There's shade everywhere. There's some sunny spots too, but a lot of shade. So that is very handy. Yeah, I put sunscreen on, but it's not as crazy. Okay, and on YouTube, Andrew Benson saying, um, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he's saying San Antonio's Ren Fair on the Riverwalk was odd. It only lasted 2 years though, and he wished it lasted more. I do remember that. That was an odd fair. I didn't go, but I talked to people who did and saw pictures, and it was. I was told it was a really weird feeling. That, yeah, I mean, on the Riverwalk in the middle of, you know, San Antonio. For those of you who aren't familiar, there's a river, and the boats go down the river in San Antonio, and they have restaurants and cool stuff on the side. It's a popular place to just kind of walk down on the side, and yeah, they do a great job. Oh, and he also says that Sherwood is definitely his favorite, especially for the trees, and definitely right. I also really love Louisiana Ren Fair. It's one of those fairs that feels bigger than it is, and it's still good sized fair. It's not a small fair, but it goes around a small lake, and yeah, I mean, because of that, you have a great view. It has a great feeling, and it also feels like it's a much bigger area because of that. But it does offer some cool options with the water being there. Oh, and the few times because it's so late in the year, every once in a while it'll get snow, and oh, snow with the water and oh, it's actually quite lovely. I will give them a lot of credit. It's a lovely fair, and they have done a really good job with it. That's one. I remember Kansas City was always one I liked just because the windy roads. It's so easy to get lost there on your first few times there because it's yeah, it's not unlike the rest of the Midwest where roads are usually very straight and laid out by surveyors back in the day in the 1800s. Yes, no, this was yeah, it's very windy all around and little gradual uphill and downhill and everything. So it had always had an interesting feel to it. Um, and Janet's right about Louisiana and the mud. Yes, there is some mud, but that's always going to be a thing at almost every fair. Yes, I remember the Texas Renaissance Fair where you have that sort of downhill walk into Sherwood Forest there. That section they have in Texas, and it's actually steeper than you think it is, especially when it's very rainy and you get mud. I've actually surfed down it before, unintentionally, where I was in my boots and everything, and I just didn't have the traction, and I started to walk down, and I just started sliding, and I surfed it. I rode it all the way down and didn't fall. Um, but that was an experience. But yeah, we got to be careful with that. Oh, and Kathy really likes the Great Lakes Fair. Okay, okay. That is a fair I haven't been to, but that is interesting to hear. I have heard good things about it, though. Wonderful cast entertainment. I'll definitely have to check that one out. That is a good one. Definitely. Mm. And Jan says she remembers following the Brobdingnagian Bards. That's one of my old groups from stage to stage at Kansas one year. Yeah, that was interesting. I think I remember that too when y'all did that, and it was one thing they did at Kansas City was it's kind of the norm at fairs when you're setting it up as a group to have you at mainly one stage. It's not as common as it used to be, but it's still pretty common where they'll put you at a stage and you'll have all your equipment there, and you know, if there's a backstage in there, you'll keep it all there, and that's where you'll be for most, if not all, of the day. But at Kansas City, and this was back in, I think my first year there was 2001, and it was not like that at all. They was like, okay, you're starting out on this stage, then you're going to be at this stage that's all across the fair. Then after that, you're going to be over at this stage, and then you're going to follow it up on that stage, and you're just like, okay. And I think that was the first time I ever really had to do that, and it was very strange. Yeah, that was a very different approach, and one I quickly got used to, and got used to the exercise. Wow. And Damaris is right. Yes, I rolled a natural 20 on that slide, I think. The thing is, DRF surfing is frowned on, according to Drew. It was not intentional. It was purely accidental. I just, yeah. Um, so true. Uh, that's one of those things. I am a horrible klutz, but I have great reflexes. So I will trip all the time, but I'll never fall down. That's the benefit. Yeah, yeah. I will just I'll trip, but I'll catch myself. So that works. Okay. Well, okay. Let's jump into 7 reasons while we're talking about this, and if y'all have any more thoughts about fairs that you like, I'd love to hear them. But uh, but yeah, let's see the 7 reasons for today, and this one I had to really think about, but I thought about doing one about fairs since I thought about the change and everything, and I thought, okay, let's talk about the good things about the different types of Ren fairs. And by Ren fairs, I mean any type of Ren fair type fair. And so here we go. Let's do that. 7 reasons. The 7 reasons the different types of fairs are great. And we're going to just list them all off, and at least the ones that I think of. And I'm probably missing some, so feel free to correct me, because I know you never correct me. But if you want to, this time I give you permission to correct me if I'm missing anything. Okay, here we go. Number 7, which is, of course, the classic Renaissance fair. Now, that is, of course, set in the traditional Renaissance, the 1500s, 1600s, and usually has monarchs such as Henry VIII or Queen Elizabeth I. And yeah, I mean, it is the stereotypical fair. When when a lot of Americans think about the Renaissance in England, that's what they think about. When they think about fairs in general, that's what they think about. It's been popularized over the last, wow, 70 years or so in art, in commercials, and television shows, and in movies, with the classic view of the portly Henry VIII eating a mutton, a mutton leg or whatever, and that's the whole reason we eat turkey legs at fair, because of that bit of press over the last 70 years. And it's not really based on anything factual at all. But no, it's the classic fair, and you really can't go wrong with that. Most of the early fairs in America, that's what they model themselves after, and for obvious reasons. It's a nice time period that is sort of a bridge. You can get away with a lot. You have a lot of latitude. It's the Renaissance, art, music. You can just say, well, it's the Renaissance. We're doing something different. It's the Renaissance. And so you have a lot of latitude. And Damaris is saying, but why can't I have mutton? Well, I don't know what allergies you have. You're going to have to talk to somebody else about that. But if we're talking about at fairs, because it's not as cheap as turkey legs. Turkey legs, very easy to get. I'm sure that somebody would provide mutton if people were willing to fork over the ridiculous amount of money for it. And if you think turkey legs are expensive, yeah, that would be much more. Um, so number 6, medieval fair. And we mentioned one of those earlier with the Excalibur Fantasy Fair, and it's themed, of course, or actually no, that's sort of medieval. That was more fantasy, actually. I'll talk about that one later. But with medieval fairs, Sherwood is a good example of that, with the time period of King Richard. That, and it has a wide range as well, where you get several hundred years that you can work with for different eras. And I think medieval fairs were kind of a reaction to Ren fairs. That's my opinion. Don't hold me to that, but I think a lot of the early fairs that made it big were Renaissance themed. And other fairs started cropping up, and they didn't want to directly compete with them in theme. So they thought, well, we can have a medieval theme. And I think my guess is that's probably where that came from, that it was a response to that. So yeah, the medieval fair, a nice place to wear outfits that are not as difficult. Oh, and yeah, on YouTube, Andrew Benson's saying that the U.S. doesn't produce a lot of lamb or mutton. You're right. I think most sold here in the U.S. actually comes from New Zealand, etc. And I do believe he's right on that. It's certainly gettable, but it's expensive. And to try to do it in quantity, was kind of my point. But yeah, that is a good qualifier there. Okay. Oh, right. And at Muskogee, Alicia's saying that they have quail, and that is true. Um, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, actually, it's after quail season. That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, completely. And number 5, pirate festivals. Now, pirate festivals have been around for a while. Um, so yeah, you normally found them like when you go over 20 years ago, you would find them on the coast, on cities like in Florida and places that had a rich pirate history of some kind. You'd get a pirate festival there, but they weren't common. You'd have a few, and that was it. Uh, then Pirates of the Caribbean came out as a movie, and everybody went pirate crazy in the early 2000s. So by around I guess 2005 to 2010, all these pirate festivals started cropping up as a response to that. I mean, there was demand. People had their pirate garb and they wanted to wear it, and it was a good excuse and a concentration on a theme that became popular at Ren fairs. And that's what kind of, yes, and Damaris got her yar in. So well done, well done. So yeah, I think that pirate festivals just filled a need. Not necessarily a void, but filled a desire and a need by fans who invested in a lot of pirate gear and wanted to show it off. And they're still around. It's a bit of a niche thing, but popular. Number 4, fairy festivals. Now, fairy festivals, well, fairies kind of started off in Ren fairs, and they were more something like for children's areas. They not always, but popularly, they were something for the kids area. And they kind of evolved. People really were always fascinated by fae, and it grew into a huge subculture at fair, and kept expanding. And I totally, the thing that surprises me the most is how long it took to get several fairy festivals going. Really, I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier. But now they are several, and they are fairly popular. I mean, they're not huge events, but yet that might change. But it is a nice concentration, and it really is a nice, focused fantasy type fair. Okay, and number 3 is fantasy festivals, and I mentioned that earlier with Excalibur Fantasy Fair, and that, of course, involves more myth or anything fantasy related from literature or whatever. Excalibur Fantasy Fair, of course, is Arthurian legend, which is always a classic and popular one. But yeah, I mean, you're going to get anything from that. I mean, it could be the fairy festivals are sort of like a subset of that. But I mean, you can get anything from like trolls and elves and all of these different types of events and groups in there, and just gear it around fantasy. Make it more Tolkien-esque, or make it more Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, which there's not a huge difference there. But I won't go into all those lawsuits. But it's yeah, it's kind of it's a thing. So definitely something to check out, and very interesting. Um, yes, and Drew is right, and I said the last time I saw her on a video chat with Drew, I said that was the last time. I always think of her as Cobweb now, because she wore she wore that outfit, and yes, it was indeed in charge of the fairies for a long time. Really? Drew is saying the TRF is mostly fantasy now. I haven't really been to TRF in several years, so that is interesting. It doesn't surprise me. Um, TRF is so big that it's really easy to segment sections of the fair and make them themed in their own right. And they kind of did that for a while, even back in the day, with the Sherwood Forest area being more the fae, and then they added what goblins or trolls or something in there, and then they kept expanding that and moving out, and that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. Okay, so then after that, we have Viking festivals. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that Vikings really popular in the last decade. I mean, it's become a thing, really popular, and just like pirates, the Viking festivals have started to crop up. A lot of them very new. There's one going on this weekend in Texas, the Texas Viking Festival in Page, Texas. So, yeah, those are really, they're small so far, but they are going, moving forward and going forth. And definitely an interesting time. So something to check out. Now, we'll see how long those last. There have been a lot of groups that have focused on Viking history and garb and all of that have cropped up. So I really think they're here to stay for a while. Number one. Now this is just what's left because I didn't touch on everything. I just went fringe festivals. And now calling the SCA events Ren fairs or fairs at all is almost insulting to the SCA. And, in a way insulting to fairs because there is a huge difference. I mean, the SCA, it's not, those events aren't really for outsiders. You join the SCA and it's for members of the SCA to go there. That's kind of what it's for. It's their own club meetings in a way. So it's a little different. LARP, where you go out and you kind of you play it sort of a live action role play is what it stands for. And it's sort of playing a game kind of at a fair. I mean, but it goes on. Some of those go on for a long time, a day, sometimes more. So, yeah, PINSIC is the huge granddaddy of SCA events. It is enormously huge. And yeah. I was fascinated. The thing that fascinated me most about PINSIC is the politics. Honestly, it is very interesting how all of that works. And I think it's probably not unlike how how things tended to work about around 1,000 years ago. So I think they probably got it right. But it is fascinating. It is very fascinating and a lot of fun. So that is probably the more open of the SCA events. The smaller ones you're only going to find other SCA members there. So definitely. Yeah, and of course then there are some very, there's adult themed fairs, clothing optional fairs, things like that, yeah, you start getting into some very specialized niche markets for fairs. But yeah, those are the exception for the most part. The first 6 events are kind of what you're going to find most of the time, and a lot of fun. So, did I miss anything? Anybody? Did I miss any type of fair that you can think of? I'm sure I probably did, but oh wow, okay. And yeah, one interesting thing is sometimes you will find SCA booths at fairs where they use it to promote the SCA and sometimes do some demonstrations. And it's kind of been interesting that they approach it that way. It's more of an information booth as opposed to a sales booth. So very different, very different. It feels more like a convention. Oh, right. If you're going to go with Highland Games, okay. See, when you get with Irish events, those are actually older than Fair. So I hate to call those an offshoot. I mean, when you get to Highland Games and Celtic festivals, those predate Ren Fair. So those are a little different. But you're right. I probably should have put those in, at least as in French festivals. Yeah. Highland Games, well, like Grandfather Mountain over in North Carolina. They are, I think, the oldest in the country, and they're from was it the early 50s, I think, and they have been doing it for a long time, and a lot of the Highland Games kind of were offshoots of that one, and they really have their own sort of subculture that is not really related. But Irish festivals also a bit different. I mean, they tend to be more. Irish festivals are more often like conventions, and Highland Games are more like fairs in my mind, because in my experience. But it depends on the location. It depends on the location. And yeah, Peter's is talking about steampunk and post-apocalyptic or tech-based. Um, Probably not. I would actually put those closer to conventions, like sci-fi fantasy conventions, and that's a little different too. Um, while sci-fi fantasy conventions kind of around the same time as Ren fairs, but a completely different history. And yeah, it is fascinating because I think steampunk is more. Um, if it's technology based, I don't know. It's hard to call it a fair like that or a festival. I call it a convention, and uh, but I mean, it's apples and oranges. It depends on how you look at it. Because conventions are totally different. When you go with sci-fi fantasy, those. Um, oh, and really, yeah, that you're probably right. In the continent, it's even older. But I was just going with America, Alacia. So you're right, in Nova Scotia. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. Hmm. Yes, sort of. I mean, steampunk. I mean, steampunk being called Victorian based is it's not historically. I mean, it's not a historical thing. It's a fantasy thing. It's a fantasy thing set in Victorian times. So I that's the kind of the difference. Um, it's yeah. I mean, it's a cross between H.G. Wells and wow. Um, a bunch of different pop culture things over the last 20, 30 years. Um, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a retro version of cyberpunk in a way. you know, I mean, it's like if you're going to do cyberpunk, but we're going to use Steam as the technology basis. So yeah, yeah, it's weird. I get the allure because that type of look and the whole brass color scheme and all of that is quite interesting. Um, Drew, I'm getting the approach, or I'm getting the impression that he's not a fan of steampunk, or maybe not. Oh, or maybe he is. Okay. Maybe he is. And steampunk is definitely different. But I see it more at conventions, at sci-fi fantasy conventions, than I do at Fair. Although I do see it at Fair occasionally. You'll see it in some of the shops. They'll sell some steampunk type items sometimes. But yeah, yeah, it is. Oh right, I do remember your avatar, Drew. Yeah, you love steampunk. That's right. I remember now. I do remember that. Right. So yeah, that is an interesting route. But yeah, like I said, um, I mostly see it at conventions. Although I don't know, maybe you see it at a um, I don't know. I haven't been to Dickens in a while. You might see it at Dickens these days. Who knows? That's kind of a I don't know if Dickens ever turned into steampunk or not. Oh yeah, okay, and okay. Now that's a totally different Seven Reasons because Kurt, you're right. Bristol does a steampunk weekend, and you will see like I've seen fairs do time travelers weekend, and I've seen fairs do fantasy weekend or sci-fi weekend, or I've seen and one thing that I've seen fairs kind of really embrace is the crossover um, with other fandoms, with conventions and fantasy and sci-fi. You have uh, the classic trope of sci-fi at Ren fairs with the guys in Star Trek uniforms walking around with a tricorder, looking at this primitive society and talking amongst themselves as they analyze it. And yeah, I mean that's the classic view. It's been parodied in so many different places. Um, the last place I think I saw it was an episode of the Big Bang Theory. But yeah, but what fairs kind of started to do was just embrace that because they realized that people were wearing the outfits to their fairs, so they might as well roll with it. and they have embraced it for the most part. And the themed weekends really helped with that. Um, yeah, and yeah, TRF incorporated a lot of different genres, and yeah, I guess some fairs do it more than others. Others kind of limit it to one weekend for the most part, but you still see it. I mean, the first time I really saw that it was being a thing was was of course the classic, and I know most of you who've done fairs for a while know what I'm talking about. The stormtrooper in a kilt. I'm trying to remember when I first saw him. I want to say it was like 15 years ago or something like that. And walking around in the kilt, and stormtrooper outfit in a kilt. It's really hilarious. And finally, it started to become a thing where I'd see other stormtroopers doing it, and it started really opening up a lot of doors to sci-fi costumes at fair. Yes, Kathy, I have seen Klingons at fair as well. I know exactly what you're talking about. Hmm. Yeah, like I said, it was about 2005 was when I think I first saw the Stormtrooper in a kilt. I don't think it was earlier than that. It wasn't 2001. I know that. It might have been like 2003 or 2004, but I want to say 2005. Um, well, it might have been there. I don't know. It was around that time. Of course, it might have been out available earlier, and I just didn't notice it. So that is possible. That is definitely possible. Mm. Oh my god, I would pay money for that. Stormtrooper in a kilt, riding a unicycle, and playing a bagpipe is what Damaris said. I like it. I think that's not bad. That's not bad. That is a good short video. Yes, that is a TikTok blockbuster right there. So work on that, Damaris. That's yeah. That's get on that. That sounds great. Nice, nice. But no, yeah. I mean, fairs where fairs are evolving too. I mean, throw in where do y'all think fairs are heading? Because now that it has sort of spread out, like Drew said, that it's TRF got a lot more varied, um, and yeah, I mean, fairs are starting to embrace other genres, other fandoms, even non-historical ones. You could say it started when they went with fantasy back in the day, adding fae or um, goblins or trolls or whatever. But yeah, where do you think they are heading? Because I'm curious about that. Are they going to go more so that way? Is there going to be a backlash where some fairs are going to start being more historically accurate and try to push back against that, and more fairs will do that just to kind of separate them from everyone else? Or is it going to be even more so, where they're going to embrace more fandoms and more cross culture, and it's going to become Renaissance Fair is like a huge misnomer because it doesn't even begin to describe the multitude of things that you will see at fair. And TRF now has a cast Doctor Who. Well, okay, now that doesn't shock me because I remember like over a decade ago when Marty was playing what was it, Groucho Marx, like a Renaissance version of Groucho Marx with mustache and cigar and everything. I mean, so that doesn't seem like a stretch for me. They were always a bit like that at TRF. And Kurt saying anime. Well, that's a good point. Every once in a while I will see somebody in anime garb at fair, but it's not common. And maybe doing more of an anime. I don't know if they could. I don't know. One thing about anime cons is that they're usually not that large. I mean, you get anime groups at the larger cons as a subset, but I don't know. I don't know how. I don't know how good a themed group of anime would work at fair, but it's an interesting idea. I mean, they might try something like that. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I wonder if it's going to be more like a Disney thing where they have different sections of the fair for different type of things, where they have the Renaissance section and the fantasy section and the tech section and the anime section and I mean, is that kind of where they're going? Oh, and Jan's saying that they some fairs are just going with adult only. Interesting, interesting. And Peter's saying it's all about the money. You know, where the crowd is, they'll try stuff, and if it works, they'll include it. I get. Yeah, I think Peter's probably right there. Uh, that is a very good point. And Kathy, I like that, a time traveling fair where you have the general theme is time traveling, and you go to the different sections. Yeah, kind of like the original. What is it? The Westworld movie where they had the different sections of. They had the Roman world and Western world and medieval world. So you can kind of go to these different sections like that and treat it like a time traveler thing. Um, yeah, and Damaris is saying that the history should always have a place. I agree with you, but a lot of fairs have backed away from the history. I don't know. I mean, not all, certainly. There are a few fairs that are very, very strict with what you can wear and with the history part of it, being in with the time period that they are, but just a few. Yes, and I'm familiar with Acon. Jan's talking about that in Dallas. That is an anime convention. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, an interesting thing about Acon, for what it's worth, I talked to them many years ago about performing there, and the response I got was the most negative response I've ever gotten from any venue I've ever approached in my life. They were just so. The guy was like, so, okay, we don't want Ren Fair people at our convention. There's too many as it is, and we are avoiding it. We discourage it, and we're not going to encourage it in any way. And I was just blown away by that attitude. I was kind of like, okay, um, but but I mean, it's their convention, but it seemed like they wanted to keep it very, very anime centric, and anything that's even a little not anime, not interested. Now that was a while ago, so maybe they've changed. Maybe they've changed. And Peter's saying, yeah, theme sections is the Disney model. True, and I think that might be where they're going. I mean, they always like to joke about following Disney's path. Oh man, yeah, KCRF. That's a different story. Always good. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about where fairs will be going, because yeah, I mean, some fairs you might not really like where they're going. Others you might. I mean, it depends on your taste and your interest, but it's definitely an interesting thing to think about. So, yeah, something to keep in your mind. Well, I guess man, this didn't. Sorry, I didn't really mean to talk about this for this long. I wasn't expecting to get into a big what fairs will turn into discussion, but I'm glad we did. It was interesting. So I guess I will call it here. But as always, great to talk to you on Monday evenings and have some fun and enjoy a fair life. And I will see you next week. Take care.